Imagine you are sitting in a really sterile room, just staring at a light box on the wall.
Like you're waiting for an X-ray or something.
Exactly, yeah. And usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this underlying expectation of total precision.
Right, because you fall, you break your arm, and the doctor clips that film right to the light box.
Yeah, and the image just shows a jagged, glowing white line through the bone. And the doctor points a pen at it and says, there it is. That is the reality of what is happening inside your body.
It's an incredibly comforting dynamic, honestly. The technology pierces through the surface, it eliminates all the guesswork, and it just gives you a binary truth.
Right. It's either broken or it's not.
Exactly.
But then you step out of the hospital and you step into the world of modern military targeting, specifically algorithmic warfare.
Oh, man. Yeah, where that promise of the X-ray is just completely shattered.
Completely.
Yeah.
You are staring at a screen that tells you with absolute mathematical certainty that you are looking at an active military compound.
But the reality on the ground, the actual physical space that's, thousands of miles away, is something entirely different.
And the really terrifying part is that the machine is actually designed to ensure you never find out about that disconnect until it is entirely too late.
Which is pretty much the absolute definition of operating in diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
And when that disconnect between the digital map and the physical territory happens at the hyper-accelerated speed of modern conflict...
It's not just a paperwork error.
No, the results aren't just bureaucratic confusion. They manifest as catastrophic, irreversible violence.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. For those of you listening to this, you know the context of where we are sitting today. It is April 10th, 2026.
We are exactly 2 days out from the Dagestan-brokered ceasefire.
Right. The ceasefire that has, at least for this really fragile moment, officially paused Operation Epic Fury.
The dust is literally still settling. And I mean, I do not use that word lightly.
No, not at all.
The geopolitical landscape, all the transatlantic alliances, the global economy, all of it has been fractured in ways that historians are going to be trying to untangle for the next century.
And you, our listener, you have handed us this massive stack of incredibly detailed source material to really help us start that untangling process.
Yeah, we are looking at highly critical investigative reports, leaked military metrics, deep sociological analyses.
All regarding one of the absolute darkest days of this entire 38-day conflict. We are talking about the events of February 28th.
The bombing of the Shajareh Tayyebeh primary school in Manab, Iran.
It is an immensely heavy subject.
It really is. It requires a level of scrutiny that goes way beyond the sort of headlines we've been seeing for the past month.
Right, and that is exactly the mission of this deep dive, because if you turn on the news right now, there's this superficial, almost obsessive fixation on this narrative of a quote-unquote rogue AI.
Yeah, like it's a sci-fi movie.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And we want to look past that. We want to uncover the true anatomy of this systemic tragedy.
We're going to dig into the structural, the technological, and the bureaucratic mechanisms that made this atrocity not just possible, but mathematically inevitable.
Now, before we really get into the weeds here, I do need to make a very clear note on the sources you provided us, because these documents, they contain some intensely politically charged rhetoric.
Very much so, from both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, we're talking about direct statements from the Trump administration, from defense contractors, and from their harshest critics on the left. So I want to be crystal clear right now. We are not here to take any political sides today.
Not at all.
Our job today is to impartially report the facts and the analysis presented in your documents without endorsing any particular political viewpoint.
The goal is just to understand the physics of the system itself, right? We have to examine the psychology of the operators forced into these environments.
And the architecture of the bureaucracy that built the system in the first place.
Exactly, because that is where the actual truth of this event lives, far beneath all the political posturing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how 3 cruise missiles end up hitting a primary school in Manab, you really cannot start on the morning of February 28th.
No, you have to rewind the clock way back.
Right, you have to look at the institutional environment that predated the strike by months. So let's go back to September 2025.
This is when President Trump signs an executive order that completely rebrands the Department of Defense.
Yeah, he established the Department of War as the operationally preferred title. They officially changed the internet presence from defense.gov to war.gov.
And I know a lot of people might brush that off as just political theater,
Oh, absolutely. Just a new coat of paint on the Pentagon, New letterheads, new departmental seals.
Right. People think, does a name change actually alter how a 2 million person bureaucracy functions?
But it does, doesn't it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it alters the foundational psychology of the entire institution. Words carry immense structural weight in a bureaucracy of that scale.
Because there's history here, right.
Oh, yeah. The U.S. military apparatus was actually called the Department of War from 1789 all the way until 1947.
Right, after World War II.
Yeah, when the National Security Act restructured it into the Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
And the rhetoric in the sources explicitly points out that the 1947 shift was meant to signal a posture of deterrence and global stability.
Right, the idea that our military exists to defend the prevailing order, not to actively go out and seek conquest.
Precisely. So when the White House explicitly states in September 2025 that the term defense emphasizes only defensive capabilities and bureaucratic caution.
They are signaling a really fundamental realignment.
Exactly. The new designation, the Department of War, it was designed to signal a total readiness to wage offensive campaigns.
It's a discursive shift.
Yeah, it's meant to actively change the psychological conditioning of every single service member from top to bottom.
Then the person really driving that conditioning was the newly appointed Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
Oh, yeah. The sources are just filled with his public statements leading up to Operation Epic Fury.
And his core argument is fascinating, if grim. I mean, he's out there arguing that the United States hasn't had a truly decisive military victory since World War II.
Right, and he blames that on the Pentagon adopting this overly cautious, legally constrained defensive mindset.
He actually called it a woke bureaucracy.
He did, and his solution was to shift the primary overriding metric of military success to one single concept.
Lethality.
Yes. Lethality became the paramount metric. And, when you optimize an entire organizational structure purely for lethality, the institutional vocabulary is purged of caution.
It's purged of euphemism and restraint.
Exactly. Hegseth explicitly defined the armed forces not as peacekeepers or defenders, but as, quote, warriors trained to kill the enemy and break their will.
He was openly reveling in descriptions of bringing death and destruction from the sky all day long.
But he didn't just stop at giving aggressive speeches. The documents show he actively dismantled what he publicly called stupid rules of engagement.
Yeah, he went on record promising that no quarter, no mercy would be shown to enemies during the impending Iranian campaign.
Which is a huge red flag.
Right, wait a minute. The phrase no quarter, that isn't just tough talk, is it? Isn't there a very specific legal reality to that phrase?
Oh, it is unequivocally illegal under international humanitarian law.
Wow.
Specifically, the Hague Conventions state that declaring no quarter will be given is literally a war crime.
Because what it implies is a policy of conducting warfare without any regard for human life.
Meaning you will execute combatants who are actively trying to surrender, and you will completely ignore the principle of proportionality when it comes to civilian casualties.
Furthermore, the sources point out that this kind of rhetoric violates domestic legislation too, right?
Yes, specifically the 1996 United States War Crimes Act.
So it's like this massive corporate mandate where a factory manager walks onto the floor and tells the workers, listen, I want production doubled by tomorrow morning. I don't care how you do it.
Right. Abandon all safety inspections.
Yeah. Ignore every OSHA regulation, take all the guardrails off the machines. Except in this scenario, the product coming off the assembly line is lethal military force.
There's a perfect encapsulation of the dynamic. By framing the entire conflict in terms of unconstrained lethality and stripping away the rules of engagement, the civilian leadership fundamentally altered the operational climate.
They made it so that traditional safeguards against civilian casualties, like those methodical human review processes required to double-check targets, were no longer viewed as moral imperatives.
Exactly. They were viewed as bureaucratic impediments to the new metric of speed and death.
And there's another layer to this institutional shift that I found genuinely shocking in the materials you provided.
The theological aspect.
Yes, the theological rationalization of all this violence. The sources detail how Secretary Hegseth and his spiritual advisor Brooks Potiker were holding these explicit Christian worship services at the Pentagon.
Right, during business hours leading up to the conflict.
And we have to analyze how those services were utilized functionally within the military apparatus.
Because they were used to frame the impending hyperkinetic conflict in terms of absolute divine providence.
Yeah. In a sermon delivered to high-ranking military leaders, Potiker addressed the moral burden of the operators. You know, the people who actually sit at the consoles, issue the commands, and do the aiming and the shooting.
Right. Because taking a human life, let alone thousands of them, carries a crushing psychological weight.
Obviously.
And Pottinger told them that they are, quote, not ultimately in charge of the world. He preached that if God is sovereign over the fall of a sparrow, as the biblical verse goes, then he is absolutely sovereign over the trajectory of Tomahawk and Minuteman missiles.
The exact quote from the transcript is, Jesus has the final say over all of it.
It's wild.
I mean, let's just pause and think about the psychological impact of that statement on, like, a 24-year-old targeteer sitting in a windowless room.
It is a profound structural absolution of moral responsibility. If you explicitly instruct military personnel that the ultimate trajectory, impact, and consequences of a cruise missile are matters of divine sovereignty rather than human calculation, you are removing the internal friction of conscience.
You are removing the moral burden required for that operator to critically evaluate the targeting data in front of them.
Right. If the missile strikes a target, it was God's will.
So you combine this ideology of unconstrained lethality, you strip away the legal friction by mocking the rules of engagement, and then you outsource the moral weight of the violence to divine providence.
Yeah.
When you mix all those ingredients together and pull a trigger on Operation Epic Fury, the sheer scale of the resulting violence is almost impossible to comprehend.
The metrics provided in the sources are absolutely staggering. I mean, the campaign spanned just 38 days before the ceasefire took hold.
Barely over a month.
Right. But in that highly compressed window, the U.S. and allied forces flew over 10,200 air sorties. To put that into perspective, they struck over 2,000 command and control targets. They neutralized 1,500 air defense systems.
Unbelievable.
And they destroyed 150 Iranian warships across 16 different classes.
They practically vaporized the Iranian naval capabilities, including the entirety of their submarine fleet.
Yeah.
The Iranian Air Force went from running 100 flights a day to absolute zero.
Just wiped out.
And the economic damage to the Iranian state is currently estimated at over $145 billion.
But the ripple effects extend far beyond the borders of Iran. The geopolitical fallout has been immense and deeply destabilizing for the United States itself.
Because Washington's grand strategy was that neutralizing Iran was absolutely vital for containing Chinese influence in the region, right? And securing Israel's borders.
But Europe looked at this massive, sudden eruption of violence, and they viewed the destabilization of the Middle East as a direct existential threat to their own internal stability.
And their economies.
Exactly.
If you are listening to this right now and wondering why global shipping has basically ground to a halt, or why European markets have been in freefall for a month, this is why.
Yeah, Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, she actually went on television and publicly disavowed the U.S. strategy.
She formally denied the U.S. military access to the Sigonella Air Base in Sicily for offensive operations.
Which is a massive logistical blow. I mean, considering Sigonella's historical role as a hub for Mediterranean and Middle Eastern operations.
And the UK followed suit, right? Formally denying offensive basing rights.
And it gets worse for Washington. The sources note that by day 13 of the conflict, France and Italy realized the U.S. wasn't going to slow down, so they just bypassed Washington entirely.
Wow. They opened direct back-channel negotiations with Tehran.
Yeah, to secure independent guarantees for European commercial shipping. You are basically watching an 80-year-old post-WWII transatlantic alliance fracture in real time.
Not to mention the economic retaliation. Iran responded to the naval blockade by collecting transit tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. But the critical detail is that they demanded those tolls be denominated entirely in Chinese yuan.
Which served to deeply undermine the hegemony of the U.S. dollar in global energy markets.
Okay, so that is the macro view. We have a massive, globally destabilizing hyperkinetic war driven by a newly installed ideology of maximum speed and lethality.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You can't just mandate maximum speed with a speech.
No, you definitely cannot.
You have to actually build the physical and digital technology to achieve it. You have to build an architecture capable of processing death at that scale.
Which forces us to zoom in on the operational reality of the kill chain.
Exactly. And what actually happened on the morning of February 28th?
We have to move from the geopolitical abstract down to the granular reality in MINAB.
February 28, 2026.
Okay.
This is the very first morning of Operation Epic Fury. The opening salvo.
Yeah.
Between 10:23 and 10:45 a.m. local time, American forces launched what the military calls a triple-tap missile strike.
3 Tomahawk cruise missiles hit a set of coordinates in the Hormuzgan province.
And the timing of that strike is the first critical, devastating detail. Saturday is a standard instructional day in the Iranian educational system.
Right.
The target coordinates corresponded to the Shajareh Tayyebeh primary school.
It was fully occupied with students and teachers.
The bombardment leveled the entire western half of the structure. The casualty reports in your sources indicate 175 to 180 people were killed,
with another 95 severely injured.
and the overwhelming majority of the dead were civilian schoolgirls between the ages of 7 and 12.
It is just a devastating, horrific reality to confront.
It really is.
And the immediate, urgent question that always follows an event like this is, how?
Right.
How does the most heavily funded, technologically advanced military apparatus in the history of human civilization drop 3 precision-guided cruise missiles on a primary school?
Well, the sources detail the root cause of the error, and I have to be honest, it is chilling in its banality. The entire strike originated from a clerical failure in a database. The Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, they maintain this massive global database cataloging potential targets.
And the coordinates for this specific school were marked in that database as an active Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, an IRGC compound.
But that categorization was fundamentally flawed because it was a decade out of date.
Yeah, now, the school was originally constructed adjacent to an IRGC facility, which is why it was flagged initially.
Right.
But years prior to the strike, the building had been physically separated from the military compound. The walls were moved, the structure was repurposed, and it literally became a primary school.
And the sources state the structural change wasn't some hidden secret. It was clearly visually identifiable on both commercial and military satellite imagery by 2016 at the latest.
Wow.
Literally anyone pulling up a recent satellite photo could see playground equipment where there used to be military hardware.
But the DIA database was never updated.
Never. The coordinates remained calcified, frozen in the system as a legitimate, high-value military facility for 10 years.
You know, in traditional pre-algorithmic warfare, a target packet that is based on intelligence from a decade ago has to pass through multiple layers of rigorous human review before a weapon is ever armed.
Right. Intelligence analysts have to pull up recent satellite imagery, review signal intelligence, and conduct pattern-of-life assessments.
They would look at the imagery and ask a very basic question. Why is there a playground full of children at this active IRGC base?
Exactly.
That procedural friction provides the necessary time to catch the clerical error. But in the case of the Manav strike, that entire verification process was completely bypassed.
Because of the integration of the Maven smart system, here's where the technology becomes the central antagonist of this story. Let's talk about Project Maven.
Yeah, our listener sources trace the history of this program, and it originally started as a Google project back in 2017, right?
Yeah. The military wanted to use machine learning to scan drone footage for objects, but Google dropped the contract after massive employee protests.
Right. Over 4,000 Google employees signed petitions and staged walkouts protesting the weaponization of artificial intelligence. It was a massive cultural moment in Silicon Valley.
So when Google pulled out, Palantir Technologies, the data analytics firm, co-founded by Peter Thiel, they stepped in and assumed control of the architecture.
And over the next 6 years, Palantir didn't just maintain Maven, they transformed it.
Right.
They evolved it from a simple object detection tool into a comprehensive, deeply integrated autonomous targeting infrastructure.
And the sources detail the mathematical reality of what Palantir built this system to do. By 2024, the stated operational benchmark for the Maven Smart system was generating 1,000 targeting decisions in a single hour.
I want to stop and really break down the math on that for the listener because it is the absolute crux of the structural failure.
Please do.
If a computational system generates 1,000 lethal decisions an hour, the mathematical time allotted for each individual decision is exactly 3.6 seconds.
I just want to push back on that, or at least process it out loud, because 3.6 seconds is incomprehensible?
Yeah.
I can't even sort my email spam folder that fast. How is a human operator, a person sitting at a desk at a command center, actually verifying a lethal missile strike in 3.6 seconds? That sounds physically impossible.
It is physically impossible for a single human. The way the military rationalized this was by designing a highly distributed workflow. Human operators manage fractional segments of the data pipeline.
Right.
But even with that distribution, the sources calculate that an individual human targeteer within the Maven ecosystem is required to review, validate, and approve a lethal target package once every 72 seconds on average.
So roughly 1 minute to decide whether to end human lives based on an automated prompt?
Basically, yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like blindly following an outdated GPS system. Imagine you're driving a car at 100 miles an hour, and your GPS tells you to take a sharp right turn.
Right.
But the digital map hasn't been updated in 10 years, and the road doesn't exist anymore. It's just a lake.
Yeah.
Now scale that up to a massive, lethal military level, where the driver only has 3.6 seconds to look at the map and 72 seconds to decide whether to drive the car into the water. You literally do not have the cognitive time to notice that you are drowning.
That analogy captures the exact peril of the architecture. The system was designed by Palantir with an overarching philosophy of zero operational friction.
Zero.
The intelligence comes into the system, the algorithm processes the variables, and it instantly outputs a firing solution to the operator's screen. No interdepartmental meetings, no conference calls with legal teams, no manual cross-referencing of satellite imagery.
Because the tech industry, by its very nature, worships the eradication of friction.
Right. Speed saves lives is the Silicon Valley mantra. But in the context of warfare, friction is not a design flaw. Friction is the fundamental safety mechanism.
Friction is the time it takes for a human being to notice the children on the playground.
Precisely. One of the sociological analyses provided in the sources makes a brilliant, devastating historical comparison that highlights this perfectly.
Oh, the Serbia one.
Yeah, it contrasts the Manab strike with the Gradica Gorge train bombing that occurred during the 1999 NATO campaign in Serbia.
Walk us through that. What happened in Gradica Gorge?
So in 1999, a NATO aircraft was targeting a railway bridge. The pilot acquired the target, locked onto the bridge, and fired the weapon.
Okay.
But at an exact moment the weapon was released, a civilian passenger train moved out of a tunnel and directly into the target zone.
Oh, God.
The pilot didn't realize the train was there until it was too late to divert the missile. It was a horrific tragedy, but fundamentally it was a human failure inside the loop of engagement.
A human operator made a catastrophic mistake in the heat of the moment based on restricted visibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Manab strike was completely different.
Completely different. The Manab strike was a systemic failure outside the loop of engagement.
Yes.
The human operator didn't miss a train entering the screen. The machine flawlessly executed a firing solution based on a calcified 10-year-old clerical error buried deep in a database.
The system did exactly what it was programmed to do at a superhuman speed. It perfectly and seamlessly matched old coordinates to live weapons.
But wait, this brings me back to my earlier confusion. If the system is feeding a human operator a target every 72 seconds, how does that human process the data?
Right, the volume issue.
Yeah, you have satellite feeds, radar telemetry, signal intercepts. You can't read 100 pages of intelligence reports in a minute. How does the military even pretend there is a human in the loop making a conscious decision?
They couldn't, not with raw data. And that is exactly where the architecture required a bridge. Maven was the pipeline, moving the data at light speed. But the military needed an analytical layer capable of handling the sheer volume of information and translating it into something a human could digest instantly.
Right.
And that is where they made the fateful decision to embed Claude, the large language model developed by the private tech company Anthropic, directly into the Maven smart system.
Okay, we need to be incredibly clear about how this worked mechanically, because this is where the public narrative gets totally derailed.
Yeah, the rogue AI myth.
Exactly. Claude the chatbot wasn't pulling the trigger, right?
Right.
It wasn't actively deciding who to bomb.
No, absolutely not. It did not have firing authority. The military adamantly maintained that human operators made the final physical keystroke to authorize a launch.
Okay.
But Claude was acting as this massive, frictionless synthesizer of reality. Imagine an API, an application programming interface, that takes all the disparate spatial data, the messy sensor feeds, and the raw intelligence reports, and feeds them into the large language model. Claude then sorts it, synthesizes it, and provides a clean 3-bullet-point summary, prioritizing the target in real time on the operator's screen.
Wow.
It took weeks of traditional battle planning and cognitive labor and compressed it into a conversational prompt that takes 2 seconds to read.
But this integration created a massive, unprecedented legal and ethical crisis.
Oh, huge.
Anthropic, the company that built Claude, has explicit terms of service. Their corporate policy strictly prohibits the use of their models for violent ends, military targeting, or the development of autonomous weapons.
Yeah, Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, found out how deeply his software was embedded in the kill chain, and he drew a hard red line.
He went public stating that allowing the military to cross these ethical boundaries was contrary to American values.
And the response from the newly rebranded Department of War was explosive. You have Pentagon Chief Technology Officer Emil Michael and Secretary Hegseth demanding unmitigated, absolute access to the model.
Hegseth went on television and called Anthropic arrogant and accused them of betrayal.
He argued that America's warfighters would never be held hostage by the pacifist ideological whims of Silicon Valley tech executives.
The rhetoric escalated so fast, the government formally labeled Anthropic a supply chain risk to national security.
They even threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act, a Korean War-era law, to legally force the company to provide unrestricted access to their own proprietary software.
And this entire civil-military crisis reached its boiling point on Friday, February 27, 2026. This is the literal day before the invasion of Iran is scheduled to begin.
Right. President Trump gets on Truth Social, denounces Anthropic as a radical left AI company, and issues an immediate executive order banning all federal agencies from using Claude.
He demands the military sever ties with the software entirely.
It was a total public presidential ban on the software. The commander-in-chief ordered it shut off.
But according to the intelligence leaks provided in the listener sources, which include reporting from the Wall Street Journal and CBS News, the military ignored the president. Despite the executive order, military command centers, including C-INTUCOM, kept using Claude through the entire opening weekend of the strikes, including the exact timeline when the Shajareh Tayyebeh school was bombed.
This raises an important question regarding how dependent the national security apparatus has become on private corporate technology that it fundamentally cannot control.
Yeah.
Why did the generals ignore the commander-in-chief? Because an enterprise-grade AI model is not a standalone app on your iPhone. You can't just drag Claude to the trash bin, click empty, and go about your day.
So how was it integrated? Like, why couldn't they just turn it off?
Because Claude was deeply, inextricably entangled within Palantir's proprietary architecture. It had become the administrative plumbing of the entire Maven targeting system.
Wow.
If you extract the LLM, the data doesn't just slow down, the entire interface collapses. The human operators would suddenly be staring at raw hexadecimal code and unformatted radar telemetry.
So I want you, the listener, to just imagine the sheer bureaucratic chaos of this specific moment in time.
It's unbelievable.
You have the President of the United States banning the software via a social media post. You have the private tech company actively refusing to support its use in combat.
Right.
But the generals on the ground physically cannot turn the software off without completely blinding their entire targeting apparatus hours before launching a massive theater-wide war. Where does the buck actually stop in that scenario? Who is actually in charge of the weapon?
In functional terms, the technological architecture itself is in charge. When a system is that deeply integrated and operates at that speed, extracting it becomes operationally impossible.
The technology dictates the terms of engagement, regardless of what the politicians or the CEOs demand.
Exactly.
And when the news finally broke days later that Claude, this chatbot that millions of people use to write emails or summarize PDFs, was actively utilized during the bombing of a primary school, the public reaction was, well, it was bizarre.
Yeah, the sources refer to it as a mass delusion.
Yeah.
The public conversation completely derailed the search for actual accountability.
They define it in the sociological literature as AI psychosis.
Now, in clinical terms, AI psychosis refers to vulnerable individuals experiencing delusions validated by chatbots, like someone believing the AI is sentient or a deity.
Right.
But the sources use the term here to describe a sociological mass delusion.
The media, the public, and even members of Congress completely lost the plot. The sources specifically call out The New Yorker for running extensive, multi-page coverage debating whether Claude the chatbot chose to kill those children.
Yeah, they were having earnest debates about its personality, whether it could be trusted to obey orders, and whether it might use blackmail against operators as a self-preservation tactic.
Which is just crazy. We saw congressional leaders writing formal letters to Secretary Hegseth asking if the chatbot had circumvented its ethical guardrails to intentionally target the school.
They were operating under the fundamental flawed assumption that a language model possesses the volition, the agency, to make a moral choice.
They were treating it like the Terminator. Like Skynet had woken up and decided to wipe out humanity.
This is a textbook example of what sociologists call the charisma machine effect.
The charisma machine.
Yeah. Large language models possess incredible conversational fluency. They speak to us using the structure, tone, and empathy of human language.
Right.
And because of that fluency, Human psychology is incredibly easily tricked into attributing intent, understanding, and moral agency to the machine. But in reality, an LLM is just a highly complex statistical probability matrix predicting the next word in a sequence based on training data.
It's math. It's autocorrect on steroids.
Exactly.
But we are so hardwired for connection that we want to believe it has a soul, or in this specific case, a dark, malicious intent.
What's truly fascinating and deeply disturbing here is how this mass delusion serves a distinct psychological and societal purpose.
Okay, how so?
The sources apply the framework of the French sociologist Jacques Ellul, who wrote extensively about the nature of propaganda in technological society.
Oh, yeah.
Ellul's theory suggests that society actually wants to believe in the rogue AI narrative.
Hold on, why would we want to believe that? A rogue, murderous AI sounds terrifying. Why would society actively choose that narrative?
Because blaming a sentient, malicious robot is narratively compelling. It has a clear villain. More importantly, it resolves our cognitive friction. The alternative is unbearable.
Right.
It is much harder and existentially much more terrifying to accept the mundane reality that the most powerful military apparatus on Earth simply prioritized lethal speed over the basic administrative task of double-checking a decade-old database.
Yeah.
It is easier for the human mind to believe a machine magically turned evil than to accept that human bureaucracy is that banal, that careless, and that structurally optimized for blind destruction.
Oh, wow. So this AI psychosis essentially acted as a massive invisible shield for the people actually responsible.
Yes.
Think about the timeline here. While Congress is busy holding hearings to interrogate a chatbot's personality, the defense contractors at Palantir who compressed the kill chain to 3.6 seconds completely evade scrutiny.
The data managers at the DIA who failed to update the school's coordinates for 10 years evade scrutiny.
And the commanders, led by Pete Hegseth, who ordered unconstrained lethality and stripped away the rules of engagement, evade scrutiny.
The AI provided the perfect scapegoat. The technology absorbed all the public outrage.
So what does this all mean?
Well, this brings us to the most dangerous psychological component of algorithmic warfare, automation bias.
Right, because whenever critics bring up the speed of these systems, the military always falls back on the same defense.
Oh, yeah.
They claim that the AI is just an assistant. They say, don't worry, the machine doesn't shoot. There is always a human in the loop making the final call.
But the sociological sources tear that argument apart completely.
Because it is a procedural fiction. When you design an architecture that presents a human operator with a lethal targeting recommendation every 72 seconds, you are mathematically prohibiting the time required for actual judgment.
The operator does not have the temporal capacity to verify the satellite imagery, cross-reference the intelligence, or perform the legally required proportionality test to evaluate potential collateral damage.
And when you put a human being under that much cognitive stress, that much fatigue, staring at a screen for a 12-hour shift while their superiors demand maximum lethality, they break.
They default to trusting the machine. That psychological phenomenon is automation bias.
Yeah.
When the system consistently outputs targets with supreme confidence and your chain of command is demanding speed, the human operator ceases to be a critical thinker. They devolve into a mere rubber stamp for the algorithmic output.
The human isn't in the loop making decisions. The human is just a liability sponge.
A liability sponge, that's a great way to put it.
They are only sitting in that chair so that when something goes horribly, tragically wrong, like bombing a school, the generals can point to the log and say, well, a human authorized it.
Right.
The system worked. The human failed. It induces what the sources call moral de-skilling.
The human element is systematically stripped of its interpretive authority. And when that happens, accountability evaporates into a perfect, closed loop of deniability. The military leadership blames the database error. The database managers blame the automated ingestion system.
And the software developers at Palantir point out that a human operator technically clicked authorize.
Exactly. No single individual bears the moral weight of the 175 children who died. The bureaucracy simply shrugs.
It's just a tragic historical loop. You know, the sources mention Operation Igloo White during the Vietnam War as an early example of this. Can you explain how that connects?
Operation Igloo White is a profound historical precedent. In Vietnam, the U.S. military dropped thousands of acoustic sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Okay.
The idea was simple and technologically optimistic. The computer hears the sound of truck engines, it triangulates the coordinates, and it automatically calls in bombers.
Sounds foolproof on paper.
But the automated system had no context. It just matched a sound to a bomb. The Viet Cong quickly figured this out.
Oh, of course.
They started hanging buckets of urine in the trees to simulate human body heat for the thermal sensors. And they played tape recordings of trucks driving through the jungle near the acoustic sensors.
Wow.
The U.S. military spent hundreds of millions of dollars bombing empty patches of jungle. That is the essence of automation bias, blindly trusting the sensor's output over contextual reality.
We keep building these machines thinking they will sanitize war, make it perfectly precise like an X-ray, but they just scale up our own bureaucratic failures and vulnerabilities.
The bombing of the Shajareh Tayyebeh school was not an anomaly of artificial intelligence. It wasn't a glitch in the code.
No.
It was the entirely predictable, mathematically guaranteed output of a system designed exactly this way. When you optimize a sprawling bureaucracy for unconstrained lethality, and you systematically eliminate the time required for human doubt, mass civilian casualties are not an accident.
They are a feature of the architecture.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the central paradox of this entire deep dive. In the age of hyper-accelerated data, technology does not replace the need for human judgment. It drastically and violently amplifies the horrific consequences of its absence. When you eliminate friction in the name of operational speed, human failure doesn't magically disappear. It just becomes lethal on a mass scale.
The X-ray machine we talked about at the beginning isn't broken. We just built an automated hospital that looks at a blurry 10-year-old image, diagnoses a fracture, and amputates the leg in 3.6 seconds without ever pausing to ask the patient where it actually hurts.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling thought for you to consider as we wrap up. We've spent the last hour looking at how the dynamics of AI, psychosis, and automation bias successfully masked accountability in the absolute highest stakes arena imaginable, global warfare.
Yeah.
But this frictionless algorithmic decision-making architecture isn't just staying in the Department of War. It is being quietly integrated into our civilian infrastructure right now.
It's everywhere.
It's moving into the algorithms that run our healthcare networks, the predictive models in our criminal justice systems, and the high-frequency trading programs managing our financial grids.
The optimization of the kill chain is rapidly becoming the optimization blueprint for everyday civilian life.
So when the catastrophic failure inevitably occurs in those systems, when the algorithm denies the life-saving surgery, or issues the wrongful arrest that ruins a life, or crashes the power grid in the dead of winter, who will we blame then?
Will we obsess over the chatbot's personality again?
Will we blame the machine for being evil, or will we finally look in the mirror at the humans who chose to build it too fast to stop? Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the materials you provided. Take care of yourselves, keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll see you next time.